Can we achieve feminist justice through the criminal law? If you are a carceral feminist, you would say yes. Carceral feminism emerged during second-wave feminism as an approach to gendered issues via legal punishment. For example, in 1976, a group of feminist lawyers in New York led the case Bruno v. Codd, which established a woman's right to have her domestic abuser arrested. The attorney Lori Woods argued that, quote, "The best protection for both a woman and her husband is to have a police officer armed with a mandatory duty to arrest and intervene." Arrest became the official feminist position for women facing domestic violence. It was said to be beneficial for all women. Today, around half of the American states have mandatory arrest laws for domestic violence, which means if police receive a tip about domestic violence, they must arrest the abuser, no matter what. Sometimes, if they even suspect abuse, they have grounds for arrest. Carceral feminism also pushed for the criminalization of sexual assault, prostitution, and so on. The thought is, if these are all recognized as criminal acts, it shows that the public community acknowledges that these acts are wrong. This is good. Not many people today call themselves carceral feminists, but I think its values remain strong in mainstream feminism. The common response to hearing a news story about a woman being assaulted is to put that man in jail. The Me Too movement heavily focused on putting perpetrators in prison. People celebrate over harsher sentences and are furious when there's leniency from a judge. But this video is a challenge to carceral feminism. It has taken our anger and frustration at patriarchy and transformed it into a problematic desire to punish, which contradicts feminist values and exacerbates social injustice. Carceral feminism makes not arresting synonymous with sexism, and arrest synonymous with gender justice, regardless of its consequences. Quote, "In turn, violent male police officers using violent arrest to control violent men was not a pathology of a fascist state, it was feminist." I understand how good it feels to watch a rapist get a life sentence, to watch an abusive partner get what they deserve. And while criminalizing gender violence and sexual exploitation is recognition of their harms, so there is some achievement there, the oppressive structures that foster violence and exploitation continue to persist. Many men agree today that hitting a woman is unthinkable, but they respond with statements like, "If I ever see a man hit a woman, I'd beat him up." Violence remains tied to justice, and I think we should sever that tie. I definitely used to support carceral feminism without realizing that's what I was doing. But after educating myself about it, I was faced with questions like, what does it mean for something to be a crime in our society? Why is serving justice equivalent to punishment? Who is justice served against? I realized that a lot of people, like myself, accept that there is something grossly wrong with our criminal justice system. People of color are sentenced at a disproportionate rate, there are tons of critiques aimed at how judges and juries make biased decisions, and the prison industry wants to incarcerate more people for profit. But despite these well-known problems, why do so many people assume that the criminal justice system is the best solution to gendered issues? It's one thing to support accountability for the purpose of reconciliation and change. It's a different story to have punishment be the goal itself.
The man who so many women say eluded punishment for so long is spending his first night of many behind bars.
The Western criminal justice system operates under an adversarial framework, which is where two parties compete against each other to, in a sense, win the case. It is a zero-sum game where only one party can win. As such, there is a binary approach to justice. You are sentenced to be either guilty or innocent. You are either a victim or a villain. If there is any reason to doubt the guilt of the accused, then the victim cannot win the case. The prosecutor needs to prove guilt beyond a reasonable doubt. Justice, in this adversarial system, is winning the competition. Thus, if feminism is going to work through the criminal law, it also has to adopt this binary framework of justice. It has to ensure that women will be recognized as victims with no room for doubt. This leads carceral feminists to perpetuate overgeneralized characters of a victim and a villain. They tend to essentialize women under a battered woman stereotype, where she is vulnerable and helpless. She is at the complete mercy of the man who hurts her. There is this assumption that the man in her life is her greatest fear. But for many women, this is not true. If you're not a middle to upper class white citizen, you may fear the state more than your abuser. As a legal assistant for an immigration lawyer, I've seen many cases where immigrant women don't report domestic violence because the consequences of state action can be far worse. For example, domestic violence can possibly make someone eligible for deportation. This is terrifying news for immigrant women whose livelihood could be threatened if they're forced to return to their old country. And trust me, the immigration board is not made up of understanding people. This has made immigrant victims torn between reporting domestic violence, which may result in the deportation of her spouse or even herself, or allowing the abuse to continue. Furthermore, race affects one's relation to the state. Although black men hurt black women via patriarchy, black men also hurt alongside black women due to racism. Their shared experience of racism builds solidarity and empathy. Black women recognize that black men are disproportionately suspected and accused for crimes because of racist stereotypes like black criminality, which was used to garner support for mass criminalization. In the 90s, white feminists advocated for harsher rape laws by warning about the dangers of super predators.
They are not just gangs of kids anymore. They are often the kinds of kids that are called super predators. No conscience, no empathy.
Who were conveniently portrayed as black men. The Central Park Five is a well-known case where 5 black and Latino teens were wrongly convicted of raping and beating a white woman, but the media was quick to describe the boys with degrading words like savages, animals, and wolf packs.
Police say the gang of attackers was actually just half of a wolf pack of some 33 kids that committed some 7 other muggings earlier that night.
Thus, a black woman may not want to report her black male abuser because despite the harm he has done to her, she fears how black men will be treated by the state even more. A lot of the times, reporting a crime done against her will also lead to increased policing in her community, which is the last thing she wants to happen. The legal process is also ridiculously expensive. In The Feminist War on Crime, author and former public defender Gruber explains a case where her client, Jamal, was charged with domestic abuse. Despite Jamal's partner, Brittany, protesting against those charges, her lawyer ignored her protests and continued with the case. In the end, this domestic abuse charge made them both worse off. Because of Jamal's conviction, Brittany lost their apartment because she couldn't afford it on her own, and then struggled to support her own child. Carceral feminism fails to recognize how different identities intersect with womanhood to create varying experiences. It's no accident that PSAs about sexual violence often use pictures like this, where the victim is a young white girl who is horrified by a shadowy figure. She is an ideal victim. She does not have a complicated relationship with the perpetrator. He is just 100% wrong and evil, and she is not worried about poverty. The ideal victim is dominated by the ideal villain. Quote, "He is a he, and he represents the patriarchy. He is the epitome of male domination over women." The ideal villain is often represented as a looming stranger, a threat to all women. He is not capable of redemption. He is merely a violent evil actor. He is not complicated. He is just evil. He is the pimp who trolls for underage girls to sell on the dark web. He is the rapist who is hiding in the bushes, waiting for a weak woman to drag into the bushes for a violent rape. He is the drunk husband who routinely gives his wife black eyes and broken ribs. To convince people that these generalized stereotypes of victim and villain are true, carceral feminism only pays attention to stories that fit these stereotypes. Think about how mainstream feminism rarely mentions gender violence against Indigenous women, even though they are disproportionately high victims of murder. Why do we frequently discuss sexual assault that happens in middle-class settings like colleges and work offices, but never the sexual assault that homeless women face on a regular basis? Many people, including myself, only became aware of the Me Too movement in 2017, when Rose McGowan, a white wealthy woman who was a famous actress, brought it up. But it was actually started all the way back in 2006 by Tarana Burke, an African-American social activist. Women of color have been speaking up about sexual abuse in low-income workspaces for ages, but they never garnered the same attention as a rich white actress. The ideal villain narrative also strips the victim of autonomy. If a woman tries to understand her perpetrator as being a complex moral being, or does not want to press legal charges against him, women criticize her for giving in to patriarchy. Carceral feminists try to deny these women a choice by saying that A, their abuser is a threat to society at large, to all women, so it's irresponsible of the woman to not jail them, or B, that this woman is so scared of the man that she can no longer think for herself. And while these reasons can be true, a lot of the times they're not. This has led to victims feeling pressure to testify in court and to go through arduous legal processes, even when it's not in their best interest. It is not helpful to chase this feeling of being right when people's relation to the criminal justice system varies. Instead, what matters is improving the material conditions of women. We need to ask, what actions would actually improve their living conditions? What will give these women food, status, education, a home to live in? When you have economic stability, when you don't have to worry about how to send your kids to school, or whether the state will deport you, you have the privilege of caring solely about vindication. You can live in a world of ideology and moral principles. But many women don't have this privilege. Sure, sending an abusive husband to jail may make us feel like good, just people. But what if it breaks up the woman's family? This already sucks for any mother who would highly benefit from an extra hand when raising a child. But it's especially difficult for low-income mothers without higher education, who now doesn't have money to support herself and her children. In fact, there are many cases where after an abusive father is arrested, the mother also ends up being charged by the criminal justice system for abuse and neglect of her own child, because she doesn't have the resources to support her child anymore. Even just calling 911 can ruin a woman's life. There are property laws that allow police to punish landlords if too many 911 calls are made from their properties. The Princeton sociologist Matthew Desmond records in his book, Evicted, how female tenants are often forced from their homes for making 911 calls about domestic violence, since landlords often use police calls to their property, on any subject, as grounds for removal. Landlords are sometimes told to evict the source of the calls, even if that person is a domestic violence victim using 911 as a lifeline. Sure, sending a pimp to jail makes us feel like we're saving young women from immoral exploitation, but where do those women go from there? Sex workers frequently receive abusive treatment from police officers, and many have no chance of getting employed at a livable wage afterwards, and may become homeless. Carceral feminism suffers from boosting itself on a moralistic high ground, ignoring the complex ways identities intersect to create varying experiences of womanhood. By characterizing gender issues as distinctly criminal, it frames these problems as being done by these select bad apples. It is these criminal individuals that are the root of the problem, not the system. The government can show that they are super feminist and will put all these pimps and wife beaters in jail, but also conveniently avoid addressing how the government upholds inequitable policies that breed the environment for patriarchal violence. The government can now free themselves of any responsibility for continued gender violence by blaming individual women for not taking advantage of the resources provided by the criminal justice system. They'll say, just call 911, just tell the police. It completely misses the fact that women in poverty will stay with abusive men who can at least pay for a roof over her head, so long as welfare is being cut more and more by the government. A mother's child could be taken away from her by social services if she loses her financial provider, and that is much more painful than abuse for some women. Like, isn't it ironic how after Bill Clinton signed the Violence Against Women Act, where he was like, no domestic violence, he immediately banned food stamps to anyone with a drug felony and denied welfare to many immigrants as well as anyone without a job.
Today we are ending welfare as we know it.
Even though getting a stable job whilst being abused by your husband, having no higher education because you couldn't afford it, and still having a baby to take care of is nearly impossible. Quote, rather than focusing on providing victims of domestic violence ways to escape abusive situations, such as funding public housing and the social safety net, the Clinton administration emphasized the punishment of abusers as the feminist priority, even as it undermined scores of working-class women with welfare reform. We cannot make general statements about what the right action is, because we come from different walks of life, and we need to be aware of the particular identities and factors that inform each case. We need to always ask ourselves, are we actually making these women better off, or are we just satisfying our own desire to feel vindicated?
But how will we understand what it is in human societies that produce this violence if we refuse to recognize the humanity of those who commit it?
Criminal law has made the connection between justice and punishment feel natural. But there are other ways of conceptualizing justice. The problem is not with women wanting to hold perpetrators accountable. The problem is with the mechanism they go about doing so. In the book Abolition Feminism Now, the authors talk about adopting a both-and perspective and moving beyond a binary either-or logic. Yes, let's be furious about the sexual abuse of yet another woman, but let's also reject increased policing as the response. Yes, let's hold men accountable, but let's also recognize that they need healing. Restorative justice is a model of justice that aims to repair harm by engaging community members rather than having a single removed judge dictate a decision for everyone. Transformative justice seeks to address not only this specific situation of harm, but to transform the conditions and social forces that made such harm possible. It recognizes that most men who abuse their female partners are not individual monsters born evil. They are the result of deeply entrenched socioeconomic inequalities and patriarchal norms. Restorative and transformative justice would benefit victims because it focuses on their actual specific experience. It contextualizes problems in people's particular lives. It also allows for all participants to heal during the process, including the perpetrators, which is in line with the feminist values of caring and empathy. It is so easy to neglect the healing process of perpetrators because a punitive justice system teaches us that we should cause those who harm us to suffer, and we should enjoy their suffering. I believe many women, like I once did, buy into the idea of men as all-powerful beneficiaries of patriarchy, who have no incentive to change. And so the only thing a woman can do is to fight and punish to make them pay. In fact, some women speak about men's ability to sexually assault, beat, and belittle women as a privilege. Neoliberal feminism especially fights to have same power as men. The archetypal girl boss is someone who can order around employees however she wants, who is concerned with her own individual success, who can be snarky and still have obedience.
You can just shut the fuck up for a minute.
But bell hooks in The Will to Change asks a very good question. Why have feminists been envious of men's all-powerful ability to be cruel? Shouldn't we think it is a terrible thing to not be able to love? If anything, shouldn't we feel sorry for men who are taught only to know violence? I have to be clear that I am not saying women need to be cooing over men, ignoring and moving on from their misogynistic acts. Women already tend to do more emotional labor than men in their relationships. We already feel a greater pressure to be the one that is understanding and forgiving, even when the man should be taking responsibility. I sure know what that's like. What I am saying is that we need to acknowledge that our relationship with men is one of conflicting feelings. We sometimes want men in our lives, we want to care for and be cared by them, but we sometimes also wish they weren't in our lives. We are angry and pained by what they do and have done to us. When feminist writer Barbara Deming spoke about her father's death, she wrote, "I realized that this was the first time in my life that I had felt able to really touch my father's body. I was holding hard to it with my love and with my grief. And my grief was partly that my father, whom I loved, was dying, but it was also that I knew already that his death would allow me to feel freer. I was mourning that this had to be so." Again, we need to move away from an either-or logic. I can both care for men and be angry at them. Mainstream feminism often says that women should always be at the center of feminist discussions. Men should always only listen to what women have to say. And as a result, we learn very little about men's role in patriarchy. And yes, how they are victims of it too. I'm not sure if I'm a minority in saying this, which goes to further show how little it is talked about, but I feel nervous as a woman to really talk about men. I am nervous to talk about how men can suffer, how men can be lovely, how I want to love them and be loved by them, because it has become so normalized for women to talk only about how they hate men and how men hurt us. Bell Hooks writes about how whenever her and other feminists wanted to include men in feminist discussions, she would be accused of sleeping with the enemy. Quote, "We were the feminists who could not be trusted because we cared about the fate of men. In feminist circles, men who wanted to change were often labeled narcissistic or needy. Individual men who express feelings were often seen as attention seekers, patriarchal manipulators trying to steal the stage with their drama." Reading this honestly made me reflect on my own interactions with an ex. The first few times he opened up about his insecurities, I was extremely pleased to have a man share his feelings with me. But afterwards, the fourth, fifth, sixth times he would bring up these insecurities, I would get annoyed. I would say, "Oh my god, we talk about this every time." I very foolishly thought that the only problem men have is the suppression of their emotions. But once they were let out, everything would be fixed. This reaction of mine ignored how pernicious the effect of patriarchy is on men, too. Patriarchy has instilled insecurities and anxieties in myself that still visit me on a daily basis, even though I've been working on them for years. So why did I have such an unrealistic expectation of my ex to overcome his so quickly? But I feel like it's important to keep clarifying that restorative and transformative justice is not about expecting women to forgive and forget the violence they experience. It's about recognizing that everyone hurts from patriarchy, and so locking men up doesn't solve anything. Their actions are the result of patriarchal norms like domination and violence, of social inequalities that are maintained by structures like the criminal justice system itself. Throwing men in jail as if it's just an individual problem allows these structures to remain intact. This is why so many women continue to suffer after carceral feminists have served them justice. Carceral feminism only keeps women and men further apart. We have to find ways of responding that do not involve the expansion of reliance on institutions that cause harm, such as the police or prisons. This does not mean abandoning accountability, but demanding it, being inventive, creating our own resources to try and bring an end to violence. Transformative justice is the work we do to create those resources.
Why is there such a stigma around this word, feminism? And why are people twisting this word, this action, into something completely different?
As with any criticism, it's important to not let it get too far. Criticizing punishment and promoting reconciliation does not imply that any expression of negativity is wrong. In this article written by Sarah Ahmed, a previous professor, she discusses how anti-carceral feminists can wrongly frame complaints as punishment. She recounts how a student filed a complaint against another professor for sexual assault, and it cost that professor their job, but the student was accused of perpetuating a punitive system. The student was told that she should have taken up more positive methods of action, such as mediation or having a cup of tea with the professor. Other students criticized her for relying on the university's complaint system, the way we criticize carceral feminists for relying on the criminal system. If the institution itself is what you want to change, then why are you using its resources? So the students saw her complaint not as a protest against gender violence, but as an enforcer of it, like the police. Sarah Ahmed writes that people are mistaking complaints for punishment because they're not differentiating between punishment and mere consequences. Quote, punishment means inflicting cruelty and suffering on people. In contrast, powerful people stepping down from their jobs are consequences, not punishment. Why? Because we should have boundaries, and because the shit you did was wrong, and you having power is a privilege. That means we can take that away from you. Think about a situation where a friend tells you a very personal secret, one that would negatively impact how they're seen by their community. You don't have a right to know this secret. This is a privilege that you have been given. Now let's say you be a shitty friend and you leak that secret, and now your friend is deeply hurt. Your friend shouldn't now spread a rumor that would ruin your life, but they can cut off the friendship and remove your privilege to know anything about them. Carceral feminism is like spreading that rumor, ruining lives without touching the upbringing and social norms that made you a shitty friend in the first place. Restorative and transformative justice is about removing privilege, seeking accountability, and hoping that lives can be changed rather than destroyed. But if restorative and transformative justice are going to work, we always need to be clear on what it is and what it isn't. Ahmed writes, I am not saying that there is no place for mediation in conflict resolution, but abuse is not conflict, although it is often framed as such by institutions. When assaults and other abuses of power are treated as styles of communication, complaints can be framed as misunderstandings. It didn't mean anything is a common retort for a reason. More or better communication is then turned into a solution. In making communication the solution, individuals become the problem. Talking about hurt or harm can be a way of not talking about institutional power. Talking about trauma can be a way of not talking about structure. Restorative and transformative justice is not telling an abuser and victim to have a heartfelt chat over coffee and hug it out. Victims of violence need more than just time and proximity with their abuser. Especially because we live in a culture that fosters values opposite to reconciliation, we need to recognize the current limits of restorative justice. If someone who has caused harm continuously refuses to acknowledge the harm they've done, then the victim should not be expected to mediate with them. There is so much more I could have said about this topic, and so much more that other feminists have already said. Leave any thoughts you have in the comment section. I'd love to see discussions and stories being shared. I'm sure there are people out there who will feel angry or upset at me for this video because it feels like I'm being empathetic towards horrible, awful men. I would have felt angry too before I really educated myself and read about the lives of women different from myself. I have been quite privileged. Like, yes, I am a racial minority. Yes, I have immigrant parents who arrived with little money, but I grew up most of my life in middle to upper class neighborhoods. I don't have to worry about how I'm paying my college tuition. I am not stereotyped to be dangerous. I really want to listen to the impacts mainstream feminism has on women who have not had these privileges. I know it's hard to not let anger turn into hate and a desire for revenge. I posted this TikTok as a haha that's funny thing, but no, really, it's hard work. Men in my life have constantly hurt me. That's why I'm making this video, to help others who hold carceral feminist beliefs, and to also help myself. If you are in the video essay community, you'll likely know Lindsay Ellis, who is beloved, but as you also may know, she no longer uploads on YouTube. But you know where she does create content still? Nebula, my streaming service which has thoughtful videos, podcasts, and classes by content creators like myself and many others. She's one of my go-tos when it comes to commentary on film and TV, and she has a Nebula original being released this month called Everyone Loves Guy Ferrari. Everyone loves. Nebula's also got exclusive content from Wendover, Jessie Gender, and other creators like myself. Even if a creator doesn't have time to make extra videos, like moi, you still get access to my videos before they're uploaded on YouTube. What really makes Nebula different from other streaming services for me is how much they support their creators. Nebula helps support original projects and allows us to experiment with content without worrying about demonetization or restrictions. By subscribing to Nebula, you'll be directly supporting your favorite creators, and not the random companies that make 30-second ads that you can't skip. When you sign up using my unique link, you'll not only get access to Nebula, but also Nebula classes, where creators who are experts in their field can directly share their knowledge and creative process with you. By learning directly from these successful and seasoned creators, you can gain insight into things like the video editing process, or telling culturally authentic stories, or improving your jazz improvisation. So if you sign up using the link below, you can support me directly and get both Nebula and Nebula classes for a 40% off annual plans. That's as little as over $2.50 a month, all while supporting me and my other fellow creators. Thank you to my Patreons for supporting this channel. Studies, graduation is only the beginning. That's a fun name. Lucas Kaiser, Daniel Nguyen, Miat Fu, Michael Dufauchard, Mariness, Kyle plus A, shouldn't talk with food in my mouth, PHPN, Farman Panu, Patrick Levy, Sam, Deep Blue but with a bunch of threes, Delta, Adam Valon, Devin Molina, Jeremy Gallardo, Sire, Zixing Li, Daniel Min, Elliot Erickson, Guojie Ku, Tristan Armitage, Shadow Lord, Jake Frame, Remy Reyes, Vinny, Nasli, Ray Yangshu, Jack Repka, Minimal Encourager, Oxford Comma, Super Mutant Behemoth, Odie, Sam, Rathan, Suvi, Cauliflower, Momo, Texas _ To Work For Me, Jiao Goncalves, Rager005, Blueberry Hill, Brian C, Paige Selby, Jasmine, Jackie Y, Depressed Laughter, Time Worn Moron, Flawlessness.com.au, Love and Angels 420, Zoe Alred, JL_Arbor321, Daniel Dangon, John Nguyen, Stephen Bollinger, Bonzo, Slush Pup, Benson Lai, Zesty Sauce. They've been around for a long time. Solomon Kahn, Jacob McMillan, Lorenzo Villegas, Jeannie, Swag is for Men, Lee or Lee, Jonathan Von Schroeder, OHB, Sabrina Fior, Dhruv Singal, Sneezy Weezy, Lee Raz Levy, Kian Nahad, C-Dub, Laura Clark, Spaceman No Helmet, Deep Toe Chatterjee, MJ, and Jesse. Thank you so much for watching. Let's keep talking, and I hope to hear from you soon. Bye!